Most people today believe that Hamas attacked Israel for the sole purpose of seeking freedom from an occupation, but that doesn't quite explain why Hamas's leader recently claimed that Israel is only the beginning and that their goal is to have the entire world under their law. The truth is, there's a really disturbing reality that's behind all of this that most people aren't aware of. So let's get into it. Today, I'm joined once again by Robert Spencer of Jihad Watch. And Robert, last time we talked about the historical conflicts surrounding the land of Palestine, but today we're going to be talking about something else that you said recently. So recently you said that this is a religious war, or perhaps a political war that's being fought for religious reasons. Starting back in their initial charter in 1988, Hamas says that Israel exists and will continue to exist until Islam obliterates it, just as it obliterated others before it. Now, when they say Islam rather than Hamas will obliterate it, does this seem to suggest that their goal is primarily Islamic, or does it stem from the Islamic sources, or are they simply using Islam as somewhat of a cover for a political goal that's primarily about the land?
Well, in the first place, John, we have to remember that Islam is religious and political simultaneously at the same time. You can't really separate out the religious and the political in Islam. The concept of a separation between religious and political is actually an idea that grew up in the Judeo-Christian tradition and is foreign to Islam. And so when Hamas says that Israel will arise and will continue to exist until Islam obliterates it, it's making a political statement because it's envisioning a world in which there is no Israel on the map. But it is going to destroy Israel because of Islam and also by means of what Islam teaches. The reason why Hamas hates Israel and wants to destroy it is based on the Quran. Very simply, chapter 2, verse 191, drive them out from where they drove you out. Now, it's a historical myth that the Israelis actually drove the Arabs out. The Arab League told them to leave in 1948 because the Arab states surrounding Israel, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, as well as Saudi Arabia, they were going to declare war on Israel as soon as Israel declared its independence and destroy it. Now, they did declare war, but they did not destroy Israel. And so what happened was the Arab League, not realizing they were going to lose, told the Arabs to leave so they'd be out of the line of fire, figuring they would be able to go back home within a matter of weeks. It did not work out that way. But the reason why the Arab states wanted to destroy Israel and why Hamas wants to destroy Israel today is because it's an Islamic imperative. That passage, drive them out from where they drove you out, is not just something written in a book as far as a pious believing Muslim is concerned. It's a divine command, no less than thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not steal. These things are not negotiable. And you can serve God by working to bring about obedience to those commands. And so this is something that Hamas sees not only primarily in religious terms, but exclusively in religious terms. But those religious terms are also inseparably political.
Okay, well, surely some would argue that in Quran 532, for example, it says that whoever kills an innocent person is as if he's killed all of humanity. So surely when Hamas was screaming Allahu Akbar, praising their God, while also deciding to rape, kidnap, torture, and behead women and children, they're clearly acting out of accordance with Islam and in accordance with a political goal. Is that correct?
Yeah, if that were the whole Quran, then yeah. And I think that if we were to gather, I've been thinking about publishing. You ever seen those blank pages books? They were popular a few years back. Uh, there were things like, everything the Republicans have accomplished. And then you would open it up and there was nothing on the pages. It was 200 blank pages, stuff like that. So I was thinking about putting out a book, the Peaceful Quran. And it wouldn't be entirely blank pages. It would have 532 and there is no compulsion in religion, 256, and maybe 109, say to the unbelievers, I don't worship what you worship, and you don't worship what I worship, and you have your religion and we have ours. And that would be it. So you'd have one page of print and then 200 blank pages. But anyway, the point is that 532 unfortunately leads right to 533, and 533 makes it very clear that those who wage war against Allah and his messenger are to be killed or crucified, or their hands and feet cut off on opposite sides. And so, right after this message, he who kills an innocent person, it's like he killed all of humanity. There's this blood curdling warning of what happens to those who oppose Allah. Also, it should be noted that 532 says, "We," that is Allah, who speaks of himself in the plural very quite often. "We ordain for the children of Israel that whoever killed an innocent person is killing all mankind." Now, "we ordained for the children of Israel" is true because that's actually a passage lifted from the Talmud. But more than that, the idea that "we ordained for the children of Israel" means this is not really a command for Muslims at all. He's not saying to Muslims, if you kill innocent people, it's like you've killed all mankind. This is something he said to the Jews.
Now, I guess so. With that in mind, when we saw, like, for example, I think her name was Shawnee Luke, the young woman who was killed by Hamas, and her body is being paraded around on the back of the truck. When they brought her body back into Gaza, there were a lot of, I guess, just Palestinians who didn't appear to be part of Hamas, who were all cheering and spitting at her body and hitting her body and so on. Now, how would that work? Because if we want to say that, for example, Hamas is radicalized, they're a radicalized sect of Islam, because surely, I mean, most, I don't know a percentage of Muslims, but we wouldn't say that all Muslims agree with their interpretation of the Quran per se. But does that kind of their beliefs, does that stretch over into the cultural aspect, or you think that like the behavior that we saw from the civilians was just kind of frustration from what they consider to be underneath Israeli occupation?
Well, it also should be noted that in Islam, there's the idea that the dead are aware of what's going on. And so, for example, there's a passage in the Sirah literature where Muhammad, he kills some of the Quraysh, the pagan Arabs who were fighting him, and then he stands over their grave and he starts to yell at them. And people say, "What? You're talking to dead people?" And he says, "Oh, they can hear me. They know what I'm saying." And so, presumably, the Palestinians in Gaza who were abusing the body of this poor woman were figuring that she would be aware of this, and they would be carrying out what they considered to be a just punishment for the alleged crimes of the Israelis. And so, it's probably cultural and religious assumptions that led them to abuse the corpse. Also, the idea, of course, as expressed in the Quran, chapter 8, verse 55, that the unbelievers are like animals, and so they are not worthy of any kind of respect you would give to a fellow human being.
Okay, that's interesting. And I remember last year there was a video that was published by the co-founder of Hamas. At least they published it or translated it last year, by the co-founder of Hamas, Mahmoud al-Zahar, revealing other plans that Hamas has. So let's go ahead and take a listen and then get your thoughts on that.
ونتكلم عن معركة وعد الآخرة لا نتكلم فيها لأننا سنحرر أرضنا فقط، ولكن لأننا نؤمن بأن ما قاله نبينا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم عندما قال: زوى الله تعالى لي الدنيا وفي لفظ آخر الأرض فرأيت مشارقها ومغاربها وأن ملك أمتي سيبلغ ما زوي لي منها. إنه 510 مليون كيلومتر مربع وهي مساحة الكرة الأرضية سوف تعيش حالة لا ظلم فيها ولا قهر فيها ولا خيانة ولا
So, given that his overall desire is to take over the world and the claim that Israel is only the first step, where does this motivation come from? I mean, could it be reasonable to claim that this stems from a desire to free Palestine from Israeli occupation in some way, or is it better understood as stemming from Islamic sources?
Well, John, it's really unmistakable. Mahmoud az-Zahar in this passage that you just played in this clip, he shows that this is not at all about supposedly stolen land or occupation or settlements or anything of the kind. It's all about Islam and the divine imperative, as far as Muslims are concerned, to impose Islam over the whole world. And that's why they're not going to stop with Israel, but go on and destroy Christianity and all the rest of the things that he said. The idea is also in the Quran, chapter 8, verse 39. which puts the lie to all those who say that jihad is only defensive, because it says fight them until persecution is no more. Now, if the passage ended there, then you could have said, yes, see, jihad is only defensive. If the Muslims are being attacked, then you can fight back. But the passage goes on to say, and religion is all for Allah. So even if you and I are minding our own business and not bothering any Muslim in the world, if our religion is not all for Allah, then Muslims have a divine imperative to fight against us. And that's why Mahmoud az-Zahar says this is not ending with Israel. He is acting completely in accord with Islamic teaching, because that's what Hamas is all about. Hamas itself is the Islamic resistance movement. That's what the word means. It's an acronym for Islamic resistance movement.
Right, and all that makes sense. And a lot of people don't realize that there's another war that's being fought alongside of this war, and that's the information war. The only problem is it's incredibly hard to know if you're getting the full story or not, given the algorithms and the media bias today. So to avoid this issue, I recently started using Ground News, and I'm happy to have them as a sponsor of today's video. Ground News is an app and a website created to give readers a transparent way to read the news, with access to over 50,000 news sources across the political spectrum in one place, so that readers can see the full picture of what's being reported. And because I've been keeping such a close eye on this war, another feature that I like from Ground News is their timeline of events related to the war and how each side is covering them. So here you can see that 13% of left-leaning sources covered Hamas hiding rockets in playgrounds and swimming pools, while 73% of right-leaning outlets covered it, which shows that there's a blind spot for those who only follow left-leaning news. And you can also see who owns these news outlets. 20% of the outlets reporting on this story are from independent news sources. So you can see here that the left-leaning headlines mostly frame the topic according to the claims of the IDF, while most of the right-leaning headlines, like this one, states it plainly as a fact. So using Ground News can help you make informed decisions about what you think and give you the ability to practice critical thinking. So use my link down below so that way you can get 40% off for this month only. So take advantage of that, and let's get back to the video. Right, and what's interesting is that they were relatively quiet before the attack, seemingly implying that they wanted peace with Israel or a two-state solution of some sort. But the senior Hamas official, Ali Baraka, he explains why. So let's go ahead and take a quick listen to this clip.
أن ساعة الصفر كانت سرية للغاية. عدد محدود من قيادة حماس يعرف أقل من أصابع اليد الذين كانوا يعرفون عن العملية وتوقيتها. وحماس سلوكها في السنتين الماضيات انه عقلاني وما بتدخل في حروب وما وقفت مع الجهاد الاسلامي في معركته السابقه.
لكن هاي كانت ضمن استراتيجيه
طبعا انه حماس مشغوله بالحكومه في غزه وبدها تدير بالها على 1.5 مليون فلسطيني وملتهيه وخلص تركت المقاومه، لكن حماس من تحت الطاوله كانت تحضر لهذه العمليه الكبيره. الاسرائيلي معروف عنه انه بحب الحياه، احنا بنضحي، نعتبر انه قتلانا شهداء، فأمنا يعني أهم أمنية عند أي واحد فلسطيني أنه يستشهد في سبيل الله دفاعا عن أرضه.
So it seems that they were lying and trying to deceive Israel this whole time, but surely lying is forbidden in the Quran in 3370. So does this suggest that the motivation is primarily about politics rather than religion?
John, I'm really glad that you said that, because you sound like every last foreign policy expert in the Western world. And that's, except that you know more Quran than they do, because they wouldn't know it was 3370 that forbids lying. But they would know that Islam forbids lying in some vague way, because they figure all the Abrahamic religions do. But the fact is that that's not the last word on this. In a hadith, Muhammad forbids lying, and then he says, except it's allowed in two situations. A husband can lie to his wife to keep the peace in the marriage, and you can lie in wartime. And in another hadith, he says war is deceit. And so if war is deceit, then obviously it's a weapon of war that you can use to defeat the enemy. And this is what Hamas did very skillfully, as Ali Baraka explains. They made the Israelis think that they were too busy governing Gaza to deal with jihad. And then there was some unrest in the West Bank that led the Israelis to divert some of their forces that they had at the Gaza border over to Judea and Samaria. And it was all a lie. It was all deception. And see, if the Israeli authorities were thoroughly aware of Islamic doctrine, they might not have been so easily deceived. because they would have been conscious of the possibility of deceit as a weapon of war being skillfully used by Hamas and others. But unfortunately, this is just nowhere. The United States doesn't acknowledge it. As far as I know, Israel doesn't acknowledge it. No non-Muslim state, as far as I know, has never shown that they have any awareness of how thoroughly deceit is used by Islamic entities who consider themselves their adversaries.
Yeah, and on those lines, doesn't the Quran say that Allah is the greatest of deceivers? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's another thing. So if Allah is the greatest of deceivers, then it's only natural to expect that the people who are trying to serve Allah are also going to think it's a virtue to be deceptive. And these are enemies of Allah. All bets are off. There's no reason to behave honorably toward them in the slightest degree. They're the most vile of created beings, as the Quran says. That's 98 verse 6.
Let's just go ahead and assume that you're wrong about this for argument's sake, and assume that what Hamas really wants is freedom from what they consider to be Israeli occupation. Now, if you were wrong, what would we expect to see from Hamas in terms of, I guess, extending peace, looking for a two-state solution, looking to freedom from the occupation, or, I guess even accepting peace from Israel?
Hamas actually was founded as a rejection of the Palestinian groups that were engaging in negotiations with Israel. So leaving Hamas aside, there certainly have been many offers to the Palestinians for a Palestinian state, beginning in 1948, and then there were several others after that. One Israeli prime minister offered them 98% of every bit of territory that they were demanding, and in compensation for the 2% that he didn't want to give, he was offering them some Israeli land that they were not asking for. And so why were every one of these offers rejected? Why have the Palestinians rejected a state every time they had a chance to found one? Because the idea was that they would accept officially the existence of the state of Israel as a condition for the founding of a Palestinian state. So, in other words, they might use the Palestinian state, they certainly would use the Palestinian state as a base for new jihad attacks against Israel, but officially they would be recognizing Israel, and that would hurt them in terms of international sympathy when they launch the jihad against Israel, because they would be obviously in violation of an agreement they had made. And so they've always shied away from that, and they've never accepted the existence of Israel as a Jewish state. And this is the clearest indication that they don't really want a peaceful accord with Israel. They want to continue until Israel is destroyed. They cannot accept the idea of a state that is ruled by Jews for two reasons. One, because the idea of drive them out from where they drove you out provides the basis for the Islamic doctrine that any land that belonged to Islam at any point belongs by right to Islam forever. And if this land belongs to Islam forever, then there can't be any non-Muslim state on it, and particularly one ruled by Jews, who the Quran says are the worst enemies of the Muslims in chapter 5, verse 82. So you've got Israel as a double insult to Islam. There can be no coexistence with it, and so there can be no Palestinian state that is existing peacefully side by side with Israel.
A couple more questions for you. What do you believe would happen if Hamas, or I guess Palestine, was successful in removing the blockade and relieved of what they consider to be Israeli occupation?
Well, then there would be a new genocide of the Jews, because these are infidels at war with Islam. And so, as I noted, 533 says they should be killed or crucified, or their hands and feet cut off on opposite sides. And there are, of course, all the other passages: kill them wherever you find them, which is repeated 3 times, 2, 191, 489, and 95, and many others that would call for warfare against particularly those who are the enemies of Islam. And the Jews of Israel have made themselves the enemies of Islam by founding the state of Israel on what they consider to be Muslim land. So there's 7 million Jews in Israel, and probably millions of them would be brutally murdered by Hamas. What we saw on October 7th would become the program for the entire country.
Okay, so final question for you. What do you suppose that we can do in order to try to help this issue? Or, I mean, do you think it's as simple as bringing awareness, or do you think there's other things that we need to do in order to try to halt the spread of Hamas and the Islamic jihad that that some Muslims believe is necessary in order to bring about, the end times, I guess, for Allah?
John, I do believe that we need to stand in solidarity with Israel, and raising awareness is key, particularly now because there's been an alarming recrudescence of anti-Semitism in all over the country, all over the world. Really, people openly expressing joy and delight at the October 7th massacre. Even university professors in the United States. And so we need to point out to people in the first place how monstrous Hamas really is, how inhuman their goals are, and how cruel their ideology is, and to emphasize that the same people who hit the United States on 9/11, they have the exact same ideology as Hamas, and there is no difference between their beliefs, motives, and goals and those of Hamas. Consequently, anybody who wants to defend free societies and see them continue in the world needs to be standing with Israel and against Hamas today.
Okay. And before you go, Robert, where can people find more of you and your work?
I'm at jihadwatch.org, which is the only news site, as far as I know, that covers jihad activity around the world every day. And we also are at Jihad Watch RS on Twitter. I have 27 books on various aspects of Islam and jihad that you can get at Amazon and any bookstore that's still out there. Also, Jihad Watch Video. I do a video with David Wood, This Week in Jihad, most Wednesday nights, not this week, but usually we do it. And you can also find videos of various other appearances that I have made there at Jihad Watch Video on the YouTubes.
All right, Robert, it's great to see you again, man. We'll talk soon.
Likewise. Thanks, John.
And if you're interested in following this story, make sure you subscribe, because we'll be covering it more and more as it continues to develop. And in the meantime, go ahead and check out this playlist with the other videos that we've done talking about this conflict, and I'll see you soon.